The U.S. has a serious pesticide problem. Cited from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 1 billion pounds of pesticide is used annually. That's enough to fill this pool and 6,000 other pools. Pesticides are used in the food system to combat against weeds, insects, fungi, and disease. The use of pesticides, especially the farmers who apply them, are at risk of long-term health issues, such as brain, pancreatic, colon, and testicular cancer,
limited brain function development,
and birth defects. More than 90% of corn, soy, and cotton in the U.S. are genetically modified to be resistant to herbicides. Consuming GMO foods that are herbicide-resistant increases chances of long-term health effects. Children and elderly are most at risk. The farm workers who apply these pesticides often don't wear the personal protective equipment or PPE to keep them safe. Those who are affected by pesticides often lack financial and legal resources to help them. This is the part with the interview. The expert I chose to interview was clam farmer Bill Dewey. He's my grandfather working for Taylor Shellfish at Samish Island, Washington. And here's the questions that I asked him.
Have you dealt with pesticides while farming? In years past, the shellfish growers in the coastal estuaries used a pesticide to control burrowing shrimp on their oyster beds. They have been an effective control and well-studied and regulated application. Because of feedback we have received from customers regarding the use of pesticides, Taylor Shellfish has committed to not using them regardless of whether the science supports it. With no effective control for burrowing shrimp, shellfish growers have lost hundreds of acres that they are no longer able to grow oysters on. I am not aware of any circumstances where our shellfish crops have been adversely impacted by pesticide runoff from the land. Do you know anyone affected by pesticides? Not sure how to answer this one. As noted in my prior answer, shellfish growers have been affected by not being able to use them, but I am not aware of growers who have been affected by runoff from them harming or contaminating their crops. Have you experienced runoff? And if so, what happened? We have not experienced to my knowledge impacts from pesticides running off onto our shellfish beds. My impression is that we have pretty effective regulations to register pesticides for particular uses and license applicators to ensure they are applied responsibly. There can be issues with the residential use of pesticides where homeowners are less informed and may not follow instructions on the label. Thankfully, most of our shellfish farms are in rural areas not adjacent to residences, although there are exceptions to that.
History of pesticides. During the 1940s, fertilizer exploded. In more ways than one. During the war, nitrogen was one of the prime components of TNT and other high explosives, and the US government built 10 new plants to supply nitrogen for bombs. After the war, those plants produced ammonia for fertilizer. Fertilizer use exploded, in part because the supply was there and in part because farmers and scientists understood how important nutrients were to crops. F1 hybrid corn is the greediest of plants, consuming more fertilizers than any other crop. Though F1 hybrids were introduced in the 1930s, it wasn't until chemical fertilizers in the 1950s that corn yields exploded. Farmers have been using the weed killer glyphosate, a key ingredient of the product Roundup, at soaring levels even as glyphosate has become increasingly less effective and as health concerns and lawsuits mount. Nationwide, the use of glyphosate on crops increased from 13.9 million pounds in 1992 to 287 million pounds in 2016, according to estimates by the U.S. Geological Survey. This is the pesticide terminal. Pesticide terminal with the fifth terminal. The reason biotech companies are racing to develop pesticide-resistant crops is that weeds and pathogens are also evolving to resist common pesticides. Agriculture experts call it the pesticide treadmill, a race to develop new pesticides and pesticide-resistant crops in order to stay a step ahead of weeds and pathogens that are starting to shrug off the chemicals used to keep them at bay. Since the 1950s, at least 512 unique species of U.S. weeds have gained resistance to chemicals, forcing us to use ever-increasing quantities of herbicides. Chemical additives help us feed billions of people and enable large-scale farming, but they also take a very real environmental toll. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, at least 61% of rural waterways contain levels of pesticides harmful to aquatic life. Pesticides also affect the soil, reducing microbial diversity and eliminating organic matter that retains water and makes farmland more resilient to drought.
Amendment. Amendment. Amendment.
By 2050, the use of pesticides and chemicals in the food system must be vetoed and moved to 100% organic agriculture and livestock. A second proposal is to give compensation to those who were affected by pesticide use, especially undocumented workers who can't afford the aid they need. One way you can get involved to support this amendment is to check the Environmental Working Group's annual Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, and to buy organic non-GMO foods.